the Bible, it talks about a census. That census absolutely never happened. It doesn't make any sense. Why would you go back to your hometown to do a census? That would be completely economically disruptive. Also, King Herod died before this alleged time Jesus was born.
Really? What's the alleged time Jesus was born?
0 BC or year 0.
That's a mistake that the monk made who put the calendar together. You're absolutely correct. But Jesus was born in 5 or 4 BC. The monk who put together our calendar made a mistake. So good history.
But the census never happened, though.
Oh, the census never happened? Of course it did.
No, the
censuses were taken by the Roman Empire. Yes, they were taken.
But there wasn't one recorded that year.
Well, what was the year Christ was born?
Any time of that year.
He wasn't born in 0.
It doesn't matter. No, I'm talking about any of that time.
Yes, it does matter.
Like, think about the census. Why would you go back to your hometown for a census? That doesn't even make any sense.
Of course it makes sense. If the law of the land is you are to be numbered in your hometown, then you go back to your hometown to be numbered.
No, but think about it for a second. The point of the census is to know where people are living now, not where people were born.
Well, that's a great bias that you and I might have living in our culture. But guess what? This is a culture that existed 2,000 years ago called Roman culture.
Okay.
All right, a little different from American culture. And I think it's rather culturally arrogant for me to say, oh, the Romans couldn't take that type of census 2,000 years ago. Give me a break. The Romans didn't do it the American way, guys, just in case you're wondering.
That kind of census would have destroyed the economy.
No, it wouldn't have destroyed the economy.
Yes, it would, because people aren't working if they're going back to their hometowns hundreds of miles away.
People usually didn't live hundreds of miles away from their hometown in that day, sir. There were no airplanes. There were no automobiles.
What if you're a month walks away, a month trip away? That's still going to be extremely economically disruptive.
Yeah, very few people lived that far away from the place they were born in that time. Just study the culture. You didn't grow up 2,000 years ago in a town and then move to the opposite side of the Roman Empire to live your life. There was not that kind of communication and travel.
It still doesn't make any sense. Why would a census care about where you used to live and not where you actually live?
I don't have the faintest idea what matter. What does it matter?
Why is there no record of the census from an outside secular source?
There are records of censuses from outside sources.
In that time, and also, there's no record outside of the Bible of Herod trying to kill a bunch of babies. That would have definitely been written down.
How small was Bethlehem? Very small town. How many babies did Herod kill? Very small number. You're trying to convince me that the Roman Empire, that committed incredible war atrocities, is going to record a few babies slaughtered in Bethlehem? Give me a break. We're not going to do that.
The Romans wrote pretty much everything down. That's why we know so much about them.
Who did?
The Romans.
No, they did not write everything down.
They wrote everything down.
No, they did not.
I studied this. They wrote so much down.
Yeah, I've had to study it also.
Okay.
No, they did not write everything down. Nobody writes everything down. And when you go back to ancient history, sir, you have an even sparser historical record.
Okay. Okay, let's move on from that. Here's another. Are you trying to argue the Old Testament is historically accurate too?
That was not what we were talking about. This lady raised a question. I was answering about the New Testament.
What are you?
Do you believe the Old Testament is literally true?
Sir, I read everything literally, which means I respect literary style and I read in context.
No.
I read fairy tale literally as fairy tale. I read biology literally as biology. I read historical narrative literally as historical narrative. And if this man uses allegory to interpret him, I respect his right to use allegory or metaphor or simile.
Do you believe that the Bible is literally true? That's what I'm asking. It is historically accurate to 100% or whatever percent.
I am convinced the Quran is very, very historically accurate. I am convinced that the Bible is very historically accurate. I am convinced that the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha have been accurately preserved. And if you want to find out what Siddhartha Gautama Buddha taught, you'd be very wise to read the teachings of Siddhartha.
But That's not what I asked you. Do you?
Yes, it is what you asked
Are
me.
you a biblical literalist? That's what I'm asking. Do you believe that the Word of God is 100% historically accurate? You're not answering my question.
Yes, I am. What you should be saying is, I'm not fitting into the stereotype that you have in your head. You're right, I'm not. Instead, I'm trying to explain myself a little more clearly than the stereotype that you have in your head of a literalist.
I'm just asking.
No, I'm not a literalist as you define literalism. And I'm outlining to you how any thinking person needs to learn to interpret any text. You've got to learn to respect literary style. If you interpret a biology textbook the same way you interpret the poem of John Donne or Robert Blake, you will flunk. You better learn to distinguish between a poem, an historical narrative, and a scientific text. And if you don't learn to distinguish between those three different literary styles, you will flunk.
Okay, here, let me put it another way.
Good.
Do you believe Noah's flood happened as described in the Bible?
Yes, I believe Noah's flood happened as described in the Bible. I am not convinced that Genesis insists that there was a universal flood, in the same way that when the Apostle Paul says, I preach the gospel to the whole earth, that doesn't mean he went to Australia and South America. He went to the whole known world around the Mediterranean of that day. Okay? So I don't know the extent of the flood at the time of Noah. But have there been incredible floods? All you got to do, sir, is read the Gilgamesh epic. And from another culture, you've got a very clear description of a massive flood.
Okay.
How massive was it? I don't know. And guess what? The Bible does not give the diameter of the floodwaters. Doesn't do that.
I'm trying to gauge your historical, what kind of historicity you believe in. Do you believe the Exodus happened as described in the Bible?
Yes.
Well, there's no evidence for that.
Well, how much evidence do you expect?
Well,
from a group of people who walk through the desert? You honestly think that 3,000 years after it occurred,
Yes.
we're going to have a bunch of artifacts
Yes,
about a group of people
absolutely.
passing through a desert?
There's 1.5 million of them. Yes, we would.
No, we would not.
Yes,
they
we
were
would.
nomadic.
The desert is the best preservation of ancient
Really?
artifacts.
And
Yes.
how much archaeological evidence do we have for the teepees that Native Americans
You don't
had?
have to. People wrote it down because they saw them.
Come on, sir. You got to start thinking. You're not going to have a lot of archaeological evidence from nomads. Nomads traveled. They didn't build pyramids. Now, we got pyramids because the Egyptians lived in Egypt and they built the pyramids.
Well, we would be able to-
Profound archaeological evidence. When you've got nomads traveling about all over the place, for you to demand a bunch of archaeological evidence, like pottery or whatever, that's highly naive.
How do you get lost in the desert for 40 years? There are millions of people living in that part of the world. Why did none of them ask for directions? And why did nobody write a 1.5 million, even notice a 1.5 million people just crossing the desert aimlessly?
Where on earth does the Bible say that it was 1.5 million?
It says it in the text.
No, it does not.
Yes, it does.
It doesn't say 1.5 million people were part of the Exodus.
Even if it's like 100,000, you can't just do that.
Oh, that's a good qualification there. You went from 1.5 million to 100,000.
No, even if they're it doesn't matter. This kind of scale, people would have noticed. And plus, it's only 300 miles from Memphis, Egypt, to freaking Jerusalem.
Yeah.
If you put they were walking in a straight line, the first person would have gotten to Israel before the last person even left.
Sir, your hyper-skepticism is totally out of touch with reality. You cannot deal with anything from history with the type of hyper-skepticism you have.
I can deal
For
with
you to
archaeology.
demand that either 1.5 million or 100,000 people left artifacts that 3,000 years later we can dig up on their nomadic trip.
Yes,
You've
but
got to be kidding me,
there is
sir.
tons of-
That is so hyper-skeptical, it's scary.
Okay, but what happened? Why did nobody else write them down when they were wandering around? And what happened? You can find out if they were there. They would have left tons of freaking trash everywhere.
Trash, and you expect trash to
Yes.
hang around for
Do you know
3,000
what a
years in the
midden is?
desert?
What is a midden? What is a midden in archaeology? What is a midden?
I don't have the faintest idea what a midden
It's a
is.
trash pit, and pretty much every ancient civilization had them at the time. We'd be able to find them. I worked at an archaeology site in freaking Arizona. They had a midden, and from that we were able to tell what they ate, when they ate it, period.
Great. How many years ago was that?
700 years ago.
Fine. Now, just multiply that by 4 plus,
Wait.
and you've got an incredible...
Okay. We've got the number here. How many? 600,000. That's men. That's insane. Like, there's no way nobody would have noticed that 600,000 people were wandering in one of the most highly populated places on the planet.
Desert?
No, the Nile Delta.
Sir, your hyperskepticism is not consistent across the study of ancient history. If you apply the type of unrealistically stringent tests to the writings of Herodotus, the Greek historian, to the writings of the Roman historians, you've just dismissed Alexander the Great with one big sweep of the arm.
Herodotus wasn't claiming that a miracle from God happened. Like, seriously, like magic. Like parting of the Red Sea, bread raining from the sky. Herodotus never mentioned anything like that. So it's a lot more substantially believable.
Thanks for your honesty. Now we're getting to the real issue, which has nothing to do with history. It has to do with a philosophical presupposition, which is there a supernatural God who performs miracles, or is there no supernatural God who performs miracles? And obviously, if there's no supernatural God, then miracles are impossible. You're right. But let's be honest, it's not an issue of history, it's an issue of philosophy. Is there a supernatural God or not? Now, what do you think?
No.
Okay, why do you think there's no God?
Because miracles are nonsense.
Because miracles are nonsense.
And like, I believe in the laws of physics.
Yeah?
But
No, sir, let him speak. You got the floor, go ahead.
I believe in the laws of physics,
Right.
and you can't move water like for 600,000 people to go through.
Okay.
Like, you can't move water like that.
Good.
Or you can't. Bread is not going to magically rain from the sky.
Good.
Like,
Very good.
what causes that? How does your God create miracles? What causes that?
You bet.